Call, bind, and apply are three super important JavaScript methods that are available to all JavaScript functions, which are used to set the this keyword independent of how the function is called. You can use these methods to tie a function to an object and call the function as if it belonged to that object. Therefore, these are incredibly important for all JavaScript developers to know how they work and when to use them. And that is why this is such an important topic for JavaScript interviews. Now, if you don't have the proper knowledge of this keyword in JavaScript, you can go and watch my previous video in which I have explained it from absolute scratch. So let's go and have a deep dive into explicit object binding in JavaScript, that is call, bind, and apply methods, and discuss some of the most commonly asked interview questions on it. So I've opened VS Code over here with simple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And our first question is, what is call? So I have this code snippet over here, which has an object with name Piyush. And I have this function called say hello, and we are calling that function over here. So what's gonna happen? As we learned in our previous video of this keyword, this will point to the window object. So inside of our window object, there is no such variable as name, right? This name is inside of this object. So let's see the output. I'm gonna run this with live server, and I'm gonna go to inspect and click on console. Oops, I forgot to console log this. Yep. So you see, we just get hello and we don't get anything from this .name. So how are we gonna call this function as if this is pointing to this object? How are we gonna call this function inside of this object? So that is when call comes to the rescue. So we are calling this function just like this. But when we do this .call, so this call method is available to all of the functions in JavaScript. So inside of the call, let's see what do we need to do. So this call function takes the object to be used as the current object and a list of arguments to be passed to the method. So this object, which object we want to be used? We want object to be used over here. So if we call it like this, now this over here will point to this object, just like this. And let's say if this function had some params, let's say age, and we are printing with age. So this we are supposed to pass as a param. Normally what we will do is we will pass it just like this. If we are supposed to pass a param, we would pass like this, and hello dash is 24. But now we are gonna pass it like this. So we have provided this object, and now we can do comma and provide all of the list of the arguments. So like this, a list of argument to be passed to the method. So I'm gonna say 24 and save this. Now you're gonna see hello Piyush is 24. So yep, this is how call works. And this is how you can go on and explain the call keyword to your interviewer. Now the second question is, what is apply? So apply works exactly the same as call works. The only difference is that it takes all of these arguments in form of an array. So let's say if we have multiple arguments, so we have multiple params over here. So if we want to send them with the help of call, we will send multiple params such as this. So just like this, and this will work properly. So yep, this is working. But what if we are using apply? So I've added apply over here, and what if I'm calling it just like this? What do we get? Create list from array like called on non-object. So this is saying is that it needs all of the arguments to be in the form of an array. So if we wrap this into an array, now you're gonna see we get the proper output. Now the third question is, what is bind? So how bind works is, let me just revert it back to how it normally was. So what bind does is, instead of calling this function right over here, just like call and apply do, it provides us with another function, which we can call later on to execute this function over here. So let me show you. So if I take this and let's put it over here, bind func, and I'm gonna add bind over here. And I'm not going to provide these params for now. I'm just going to call it. So what do we get inside of it? We get a function. So if I go and console log this, you're going to see we get this function over here, exact same say hello function. So it has provided us with this reusable function. So the benefit of this is, so let me show you. If I call it 24 and I called it just like that, and I can call it again. So this is a reusable function. So let me just change this age. I don't know, let me use 69. Yeah, you can see. So this is one of the benefits of bind. We will discuss more benefits of call, bind, and apply, and how are they used in our code base, and what types of different use case and benefits they provide to us. Also, in this video, we're gonna learn how we can go on and create our own call, bind, and apply methods. Yes, we're gonna understand how we can create the polyfills for each one of those. So now let's jump into some output-based questions. So interviewer can give you a code snippet such as this to understand if you really understand call, bind, and apply properly. So we are provided over here with an object called person with the name property. And we have this function called say hi, which takes age as an input, and this prints this dot name is and the age keyword. And then we go on and call it with respect to this person object, so that this function points to this person object. So in the first console log, the say hi function is called with this call keyword, and then in the second one it is called with the bind. So interviewer can ask you what is going to be the output for both of these. So obviously this will be called instantly, as we discussed a few minutes ago, that this will execute this say hi function on this object and will provide this age 24. So the output will be Piyush is 24. And for this one, this is obviously not going to be executed instantly, and it's going to in turn provide us with another function which we can execute later on. So that is what is going to be the output for this. So let's check it. Yep, you see, first it's executed, and in the second one it provides function over here. Now the next question is a bit more complex. We are provided an age variable over here, and we are provided an object called person with name property and age property, and we have a function called getAge which returns this dot age. And over here we have another object called person2 with age 24. And now we are calling this getAge function from this person object, and we are putting call on it. What do you think is going to be the output for this? Let's break it down. So first of all, let's forget this call for now. So if we just call it just like this, what's gonna happen? As I discussed in our previous video, if you call this function, this keyword inside of this function will point to this object right here, right? So this will simply return us 20. But over here, we are calling this function with this call keyword. So now this function will, instead of pointing this person object, will point to this person2 object. So person2 already has the age property, so this will obviously output 24. And as you can see, to confuse us, interview has also provided this age variable outside in the global scope, so that candidate gets panicked and thinks that okay, age might be 10. So but that's not the case. So let's go on and console log this, and let's see. Yep, the output is 24. Awesome. Now obviously this could have also been done with the help of apply and bind as well. So if I call it with apply, so this will work exactly the same, because we don't have any arguments over here, so it won't make any change. So yep, same thing. And if we add bind, so this will return a function to us. So let's call that function over here itself, and yep, same thing. Now for our next output based question, we have this variable called status, and inside of this set timeout we have another variable called status, and we have this data object which again has a status, and we have this function called getStatus which returns this dot status. And then we are console logging data.getStatus, that is function from this object right here. And after that we are console logging getStatus, but this time using call, and we are providing it this object. So what is this over here? We're going to discuss everything. Let's break it down. So for this line number 16, we are calling data.getStatus, and as we already know that this function belongs to this data object, and the value of this keyword depends on where the function is called. So this function is called inside of this object, so this will obviously print this avocado emoji, right? But what about this one? We are calling it with call keyword and providing it this keyword over here. So a lot of people will think that okay, this might be the context of this one over here, right? So they will simply say okay, this will print this emoji over here. Let's see. No, but it printed this emoji which was in our global scope. So what's happening over here? This is pointing to the global scope. So if you remember from our previous video, I explained that this never points to a function, and set timeout over here is obviously a function. So this will not point to it, and instead it will point to the context of this function. So what this function is pointing to, the set timeout is pointing to the global object. So that's why this keyword over here will be a global object, and we will get this output right here, this emoji as an output. Alright, so for our next question, we are provided with this code snippet, and we are asked to call print animals such that it prints all animals in this object right over here. So let's see how that can be done. So we have this array of objects called animals with the species and name property, and inside of this function it takes this I as a param and it's assigning this dot print to this function right over here with this console log which prints the name of species and the name, and then we are simply calling this function. So let's try to call this function over here. What do we get? We get obviously undefined because this over here is pointing to global object and we want it to point to this object over here. So what can we do? Can we do something like this? No, that doesn't work, because obviously this is an array of object and we cannot directly access this dot species inside of it. So I think we have to use something like a for loop, just like this, and inside of it I'm just gonna take that and I'm gonna paste it over here, and since it's gonna provide all of the objects one by one, so we can provide the context of each object one by one as we go along in this loop. So we can say animals, and first time we can provide it index of 0 and then index of 1. So I think this will probably work, and this also takes this index param. So let's provide it I as an index so that it prints all of the numbers, and let's see. Yep, we get the output. So you see how interviewers confuse you by asking some tricky questions. I know for some of you this might not be such a tricky question, but for a beginner who is just starting out with call, bind and apply, this can turn out to be a little bit confusing. So try to take your time and think about what interviewer is trying to tell you. So the next question is append an array to another array. Now I know there can be a lot of ways to do this by using concat or writing a simple for loop for it, and a ton of other ways as well. But what if interviewer restricts you to use let's say concat, because concat returns you with a completely new array instead of modifying the original array. So such as we are provided with these two arrays, if you're going to use array.concat elements, it's going to provide you with a new array instead of just manipulating this array and adding all of these elements onto it. So what if you had all of these restrictions? I know it's going to be easy to write it with the help of for loop as well, but I'm going to show you even simpler way how you can achieve that. So if I go on over here and say array.push, we can push any element by using this array.push inside of this array, right? If we use let's say 5 and just console log array, you're gonna see we have a, b, 5, right? But what if we want to push this elements? It's gonna simply push it, but it's gonna push the whole array inside of it. That is not what we want. So what we can do is we can write array.push.apply. So what does apply do? With the help of apply, we're gonna first of all provide it a context. So we are gonna provide this array context over here. So now this push function will work on this array and point to this array. And what else we want to do? We want to append all of these elements. So as you already know, this apply keyword takes array as an input. Array as an argument. So we're gonna take this elements and provide it, comma, elements. So now this push function, instead of adding this complete array, is going to break down this array and takes all of its individual arguments and push them one by one to this array. So you're going to see, yep, we have appended this array successfully. Now we have another similar question over here, which is asking us to find min max of a number in an array. So now we're going to use apply to enhance some of the built-in functions in JavaScript. So as you already know, we have a function in JavaScript called math.max. And it takes a few values, let's say 3, 5, 2, 1. And when we save this, go to output, and you're going to see that it provides us with the maximum value among all of these. But what if we want to calculate the maximum value inside of this array right over here? If we simply provide it to it, you're going to see nothing happens, because obviously this doesn't work on the arrays. Now I know there are other ways to do this as well, like by using for loops. So let me show you. So let's say if we're using some loop based algorithm like this, we're gonna use for loop and we're gonna check each of the number of this array one by one and assign it max and min one by one. And this is a huge code compared to what we are going to use to solve our need. So let me remove this quickly. And what we can simply do is we can say max.max.apply, and over here we don't need any context, so we don't need to provide any object. So I'm just gonna say null, and we're gonna provide the arguments in form of the array numbers, which we already know that this apply takes the arguments in form of an array. So this will take all of the arguments one by one and provide it to this maths.max, and now we will see the output 7. So this is what we wanted to have. So simply we can provide min as well. It's going to provide us 2. Now we have another output based question over here where we have been provided a function f which console logs this, and we have this user object inside of which we are calling this f function with bind keyword, and we are providing the context as null, and then we are calling user.g. So what do you think is going to be the output? This is a little bit confusing. A lot of people will think that we're calling user.g over here, and this is being called inside of this object. So this will point to this user object over here, right? But that is not going to be the case. Since we are using f.bind over here, this will return us another function with the context of null. And now even if we are calling this function inside of this user object, the context of this bound function is hard fixed. So this function over here will be pointing to the window object. So you see, this is pointing to the window object. Now we have another output based question over here on bind chaining. So interviewer can provide you a function like this and can call this function with the help of bind and can provide the context such as this. Okay. And then again, the interviewer has chained bind on the function that was provided to us with another object. So what do you think is going to be output? So a lot of people will think that, okay, we will return an object with this, and then we are again changing the context with this name Anne. So this will obviously print Anne. But no, that's not the case. Once a function is bind to a particular object, it will always be bound to that particular object, as we discussed in our previous question. Bind chaining doesn't exist. This will not work at all, and it will only print this John name. We see, yep, we get this John as an output. A function which is bound by using this bind keyword cannot be rebound. So for this next question, we are provided with this code snippet over here, and we are asked to fix the line number 22 to make the code work properly. So the line number 22 is this over here. We have this function called check password, which prompts the user to enter a password. Okay. So if the password is roadside coded, it's gonna call this success function, else it's gonna call this failed function. And obviously we can see where the success and failed are coming from. They are coming from over here. We are providing these callbacks, and these callbacks are inside of this object. This object has this name Piyush Agarwal, and this has this login successful and login failed. Okay, fair enough. Now, when we are calling these functions over here, success and failed, this function doesn't have a name, this dot name, because obviously when we are executing this function inside of this check password function, this will try to find this dot name inside of over here, that is inside the global scope. So how can we bind these functions to this user object and then provide it to this check password? Obviously, as I mentioned, we can bind it by using bind keyword. So we're gonna say dot bind, and so first let me just instead of just doing this, let me just show you how this will work. So this is gonna ask us for password. So I'm gonna say roadside coder and click OK. So this will just show us logged in, and it's not gonna show us who logged in. So this should show us Piyush Agarwal logged in, right? Or Piyush Agarwal failed to log in. So if we, let's say enter the wrong password, it's gonna show us failed to log in. So now I'm just gonna say dot bind and provide it with this user object over here as well. Bind and user object. Save this, and again we're gonna enter the password. Okay, now you can see Piyush Agarwal logged in, and if we enter the wrong password, Piyush Agarwal failed to log in. Yep. So you should keep all of these things in your mind while dealing with this keyword right over here. Call, bind and apply are your best friends while solving the questions related to this keyword. And as you go on and practice more of such questions, you're gonna have more command over this keyword, implicit binding, explicit binding, and call, bind and apply. So let's move on to our next question. Now this next question right over here is more of a follow-up question of our previous question. So in this, interviewer has modified this user object. And now instead of two functions called login success and login fail, we have just one function called login, and it takes true or false. If it takes true, then login successful. If false, then login failed. Then how are we gonna call this check password and provide what are the two arguments that we are going to provide so that it calls OK and fail over here, since we just have one function over here, right? So let's see. If we, let's say, simply call user dot login with true, and over here user.login with false. Let's see what do we have the output. What's going on over here? So this is already called, since we are executing user.login over here, so obviously this will call it right over here and not return a function to this check password. So these both are called over here, and now it's asking for password. Even if we enter something, it's gonna give us error because OK and fail are not functions over here. They are simply just values, or in this case not even value, because we are simply console logging it. So what we will do is, we are supposed to return a function, right? And how are we supposed to do that? With the help of bind. So we're going to say dot bind and provide it with a context, which is going to be user object right over here. And similarly, we're going to do this over here as well with user object. And just like call, we can provide the arguments over here as true and false. So this will act as the OK function, and this will act as the fail function. So let's see. Let's enter our password. Yep, successfully logged in. Let's enter the wrong password. Failed to log in. Awesome. All right, pause. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/Piyush_Eon or click the link in the description down below and hit that follow button right now. I'm waiting for you. I'm still waiting. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the video. Now, up until this point in this video, we've been only discussing our questions with the help of a normal function, right? I know some of you might be wondering how an arrow function performs with call, bind, and apply. So Interviewer has provided us with this code snippet with the variable age 10 and with the object person, which has name, age, a function called getAgeArrow with the arrow function which console log this.age, and a getAge function, a normal function, which is going to console log this.age as well. And then we have another object called person2. This is similar to one of our first question of this video, but we already know if we call this getAge, which is a normal function, if we call it with this call keyword, this will print the age inside of person2, since we are providing person2 context over here, right? So this is simple. We know that how this will work, but how will this arrow function work? When we call this, oops, my bad. So this will be getAgeArrow. Now, it doesn't matter if we are adding call, bind, apply, anything to this arrow function, this will work as it was working earlier. So if you remember from our previous video, this takes the context of the arrow function from its parent normal function. So it doesn't have any parent normal function over here. So obviously this is going to give us output as undefined, because this is going to be pointing to the window object. So if we see, yep, we get undefined. And if I remove this dot age and just print this, yep, we see we get this window object over here. So this arrow function, regardless of it, if it's being called by itself or call, bind, and apply, we can't manipulate the context of an arrow function with the help of call, bind, and apply. So this doesn't work at all. So this can also be asked in your interviews, and interviewers can ask you to confuse you, and you might end up thinking that this will work exactly the same as a normal function. So now you know. Now the moment that you all were waiting for has finally come. We're gonna create a polyfill for call, bind, and apply. Maybe some of you were waiting for this moment. I don't know. Well, I was waiting for this moment because this is probably the most important question of this entire video. This is asked in senior developer interviews a lot, to create a polyfill for call, bind, and apply, and sometimes even in junior developer interviews as well. So make sure you pay attention from now on. Let's get serious. So let's pause for a moment and think, how does a call method works? So call takes two things, right? So let's say if a function such as this called purchase car, and we have an object called car1, and we want to invoke this function on this object. So what are we going to do? We're going to say purchase car dot call and simply provide it with the context of this car1, right? And we obviously need to provide this currency and price. So let's add rupees as the currency, and we have price, so 50 lakhs. And this will simply print I have purchased red Ferrari for 50 lakh rupees, right? So let's see the output. Yep, as expected. But since we are supposed to create our own call polyfill, so this will take these things. First, it's going to take the context, and after that, it's going to take all of the arguments. So let me comment this out for now. And over here, I'm going to create the polyfill. So since it belongs to the prototype of function, we're going to say function dot prototype dot let's say my call, and inside of this we already know we gonna have a function, an anonymous function. Now, as we already discussed, this is going to take a few things. First of which is going to be the context, which let's keep an empty object over here as a default value. And the other thing is going to be all the arguments. So we don't know how many arguments are going to be there, right? So we're gonna just use this rest parameter over here. Now, inside of this, first thing first, the most important thing, and your interviewer is also going to respect that. First, you're gonna check for any errors, right? For all of the edge cases of the error. So I'm gonna first check if this thing that we are calling this my call on is actual function or not. So first of all, we're gonna check if type of this is not equal to a function, then we're just gonna throw some error. So throw new error. Inside this, I'm just gonna say no, this it's not callable. Yep. So that's error handled right over there. And now simply we're gonna take the function that we are calling this my call on and add it to this context right over here. So I'm gonna take context. So this context is an object, right? So I'm just gonna simply insert our function. So I'm gonna say context dot, I'm gonna create another new function inside of that context, and I'm just gonna simply say it has this function that we're trying to call, which let's say in our case is purchase car. So we just added this purchase car so that this keyword inside of this purchase car starts pointing to this context right over here. And in the next line, we obviously need to use these arguments as well, right? So simply we're just gonna take this function that we created over here and call it with all of these arguments, just like that. And that should do it. Let's test it out. I'm just gonna, instead of this call, I'm gonna use my call, and let's see if it works or not. Yep, it works flawlessly. Awesome. Now let's go on and create the polyfill for apply. So this is our previous code, right? And how are we gonna create the polyfill for apply? Instead of this my call, I'm just gonna say my apply. And as you already know, there's just one small difference in both of these, is that this takes an array as an input. So I'm just gonna say args array, or let's just keep it args for consistency, you know. And I'm gonna give this initial value as an empty array. Now in this case, we are going to provide it the arguments in this format, right? But let's say user has not provided this format, then we need to check this edge case as well, right? And if it is not an array, we are supposed to throw an error. So I'm gonna say if array dot is array, and we're gonna provide this args inside of it, and we're gonna say if this is not an array, if this is false, then what are we gonna throw? We're gonna throw this error over here. Create list from an array like called on non-object. So if you remember earlier in this video, we got this error, right? When we provided it with a non-array or non-object. So we're gonna throw this error. And rest of the things are gonna be exactly same. We're gonna again provide this context with this function, and we're gonna provide all of the arguments. We're gonna spread all of the arguments inside of this function. Let's see how that's working, and it's working flawlessly. Awesome. Now the next is polyfill for bind method. So this could be a little scary to think about if it came in your interview, because bind is a little bit different from call and apply. It returns as a function instead of instantly executing that function over there. Now before starting, let's break down bind. So I'm gonna comment it out for now, and I'm gonna call it with bind over here. And I'm just gonna remove this array as well. So now simply we're calling this purchase car, right? And we're saying purchase car dot bind and providing this car one context. So obviously this will return us another function. So I'm gonna say const new function, and I'm just gonna console log this new func over here, and this should provide us a function which is expecting these currency and price. So yep, we get this console log over here of this function. And when we go on and call this just like this, it's going to provide us this. I have purchased red Ferrari for undefined. So this is giving us undefined since we haven't provided us with these arguments over here. So we can provide it argument later on, or we can provide it over here itself. So let me just provide it with both of these arguments, and we will see the expected output. Or we could have taken both of these arguments and we could have provided them over here as well. and this will work exactly the same. So we have to think about all of these cases while building the polyfill for bind. Okay, let me uncomment this code right here, and I'm gonna remove all of this except this error checking, because obviously this is what we're gonna need in bind as well. So instead of my apply, I'm gonna say my bind, and we will obviously take a context. We're gonna take the arguments. So this can take the arguments over here as well. So I'm just gonna use the rest parameter and say args over here. Right, just like in call. So we have handled one of the conditions over here. Now, remember, we are supposed to return a function from this bind method. So first of all, it's gonna be same as previously, that we're gonna assign this function in this context. So context.fn equals this. Now after this, we are supposed to return a function. So I'm gonna say return function, an anonymous function, and inside of it, we're gonna take this context and we're gonna call it, and we will return the value. So we will say return context.fn, and obviously we can provide the arguments later on as well. So I'm gonna take this args and spread it over here as well. And I believe this should work. Let's see, let's use my bind over here, and I'm just gonna call it first by providing args over here. So let's see if this works or not. Okay, this is working properly. Let's take both of these arguments and provide them over here. It's giving us undefined. Maybe I made some mistake. Oh, by the way, for this error, bind gives a different error. It gives this cannot be bound, as it is not callable. If you go and check bind with an error, it's gonna give you this exact same error. And for the other thing, why this is not working is we need to provide access arguments over here. New args, and we're supposed to spread them just like this, and I believe this should work. Yep, this is working properly, because obviously we are providing them later, so it's going to add to the list of all of the arguments that were provided previously. So if let's say I'm going to take this and I'll provide one argument over here and one argument over here, so this will still work. So you see, it's working properly. So yeah, that was the polyfill for bind, and these were all of the most commonly asked interview questions on call, bind, and apply. Now, if you would like to read all of these questions in a written format, I have also written a blog for this complete video, link for which you will find in the description down below. And if you like this video, give this video a huge fat thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more such awesome interview videos, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.